Welcome everyone to our 5th Professional Advisor webinar, and today's topic is Revitalising Dormant Trusts. Our guest speaker today is Laura Cameron-Long, who is Revitalising Trusts Programme Manager for UKCF. Before I introduce you to Laura formally, I'm going to hand you over to Amy Nash, who is our Development Manager for Kent Community Foundation, who will run through a brief presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Josephine. Just bear with me while I just share my screen. So hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. As Josephine said, my name's Amy Nash and I'm Development Manager here at Kent Community Foundation. And today I just want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about around the topic of revitalising dormant trusts. And what we mean by that really is unlocking those trusts that are currently inactive to benefit the local community. So I thought I would start by just giving you a quick overview of the legal obligations of charity trustees according to the Charity Commission. So ensuring that the charity is carrying out its purposes for the public benefit, and with that it goes is also the obligation of spending its income for the benefit of the public, and complying with the charity's governing documents and the law. And within a governing document that's created when you register a charity is the charity's objectives, and that's also something that needs to be complied with. And there are a few others in there that you can see: acting in the charity's best interests, managing the charity's resources responsibly, acting with reasonable care and skill, and ensuring that the charity is accountable. Now, if a charity is not able to fulfil its obligations, they can decide to pass on their assets to another charitable organisation. And this is where KCF can sometimes come in. I've given a link here to all of the detailed guidance on the government website according to the Charity Commission rules. So have a little look there if you want to see all of the detailed information. So, as I mentioned, some trusts do decide to transfer their assets to another organisation, such as ourselves, and there can be many reasons for this. It could be that they don't have the resources, they don't have the time. Some of the trustees may have stepped down, so they don't have the experience, or they may just not know how to spend their income in terms of meeting their objectives. And Kent Community Foundation and other community foundations across the UK are well placed to support trusts with this issue. We as a foundation work with trusts and foundations in a number of ways. So sometimes we actually carry out grant making for larger national charities. So we carry out their grant making in Kent. Or it could be that, like I've mentioned, we do carry out trust transfers for those that are inactive or dormant. Whatever the reason is, we have a team of experts to help, and we have experience of all of the small local charities around Kent and Medway. So looking at the trust transfer process, it is quite straightforward, and we can talk trustees through the process. And as I mentioned, we can ensure that funds are used in the same way as specified in the original charity objectives. There are so many dormant trusts all over the UK, and this is where the UKCF and the Charity Commission Revitalising Trusts programme comes in. So Laura and Josephine will talk more about that shortly. Now, we also get approached about dormant trusts through local authorities. So sometimes they are sitting on a number of dormant trusts and need help because they don't have the expertise to spend the income according to the obligations. And similarly, as professional advisors, it could be that you come across dormant trusts from a number of sources, and you need some support. It could be that a trust has been left in a will, and the person wants you to fulfill their grant making for them, and you may not know how to do that. It could be that you have a client who is a trustee of a dormant trust, and they just need some advice on how to, again, fulfill their obligations. So whatever the reason, you know, you can always come to us for advice. I've given a link there to our webpage for professional advisors, so there's some more information there for you. We also have a toolkit for professional advisors, so do go and have a look on our website for that. And we do offer information on our LinkedIn group as well. And we do have a fund holder brochure if any of you are looking to give some information to your clients, then do let me know if you want some of those. So that's a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. So I'll hand back over to Josephine and Laura for the interview section.
Thanks very much, Amy. And just for everyone else's benefit, we will circulate that presentation with those links in there following the webinar today. So don't worry if you didn't get any of those links down, we'll make sure we circulate afterwards. So welcome, Laura. Thanks so much for taking the time to do the webinar today. I think most professional advisors, wealth managers will actually have some issue around this with potential clients who have set up a family trust or foundation with charitable objectives, but they're not actually meeting those objectives. So it's great to have you along to pick your brains and get some expert advice. So before we start, Laura, would you like to just tell us a bit about your role and sort of who UKCF is in the context of community foundations?
Yes, of course. So yeah, thank you for having me. Delighted to be here. So hopefully I am an expert and I can help a bit. So UK Community Foundations is the membership organisation for all of the community foundations within the UK. There's 46 community foundations, nearly 47, I believe. And we exist to support community foundations in the work that they do to encourage local philanthropy. And we do as much as we can to help with that. My role within that is Revitalising Trusts Programme Manager, and essentially it's exactly what's been said. We work to revitalise trusts, so that basically means to get them spending their money again in some way, but I'll go into that in a bit more depth in a minute.
Great, thanks very much, Laura. So on to our first question then. So what is the Revitalising Trusts programme and why was it created?
The Revitalising Trust Programme was set up in 2018, and it was created because when the Charity Commission did a bit of scoping, they realised that there was over £1 billion locked up in these inactive trusts, which needs to be spent on the public benefit. So it was set up to as a partnership, really, with UK community foundations and the network, with the idea of getting this money working again and making sure that it was spent back in the local community. In the 3 years that it's been established, it's so far revitalised nearly £52 million, and 19 million of that has come to the network. So 19 million has been endowed within the community foundation network to be spent on great local projects. It's an incredible partnership that we have. I think that the network was chosen because of how far our reach is, the fact that we do reach into every single part of the UK, and also the fact that we have our quality assessment. So it's the Charity Commission recognises that there is a certain standard that all foundations will meet so that their grant making is excellent across the UK and they're a trusted network. It's very much led by the Charity Commission, so it's a series of letters that get sent out to dormant or inactive trusts to just say to them, what's the problem? Can we help you? There are a few options open to you, and then we hopefully get a response. And we have this great partnership with the Charity Commission to make sure that transfers happen quickly and legally, and it's a nice smooth process, as Amy was mentioning. So what is an inactive or dormant trust with regards to this programme? So an inactive trust is one which hasn't spent any money within the last 5 years, and a dormant trust is an inactive trust is one which has spent less than 30% of their income in the last 5 years, and a dormant trust is one that's spent nothing in the last 5 years. And so the Charity Commission does a little scope through their register to have a look for that, for trusts that fall into that criteria, and then they contact them and offer a few options for revitalisation. So that can be, generally it's one of three options. So the first option is, can you be supported as trustees to update your objects, to maybe expand your geographical location, to look at your beneficiaries? Do you need some support in getting new trustees on board? That kind of thing, so supporting with the governance. And then if they decided to do that themselves and then began spending, then that would be the charity revitalising themselves. A trust can spend down their money, so they can just give it away to another charity within, obviously, the one that aligns with their charitable objects. Or the other option is to transfer their assets to a community foundation, which is obviously the one that we really would encourage, because then we know that that money is put into endowment. We know that it's then very well managed and looked after, and it means that it will support projects within local areas in perpetuity. What's also great about the transfer process is, as and where possible, the trustees can still be involved, and potentially, depending on the asset value, named funds can be set up as well. So there's some great opportunities with the programme.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. And I know that you were asking Charity Commission this question. I don't know if you have the answer yet, but if that dormant or inactive trust sits within a private bank, so a wealth manager manages that relationship with a family who's set up a trust and foundation but has never actually used any of the income for charitable purposes. So if that has happened in the past, how does that work? And do the Charity Commission, are they able to then identify those? Because obviously if they're charities in their own right, they have to be registered with Charity Commission, and returns and everything else has to still happen. So in that situation, for the benefit of this audience, how does that work?
Well, if they are considered inactive, at some point they will come up on the Charity Commission's SQL. So when they're doing their research to find inactive trusts, they will pop up. We can definitely support any transfer, even if they are within investment banks. So that's something we work very closely with several investment banks on exactly this. Also, it is a requirement. When trusts are created, it is a requirement that funds, the funds are spent on the public benefit, and the Charity Commission will measure that. So they will be looking at that to say, well, if you're not spending your money, you are not fulfilling the public benefit requirements. So it is a really, really important thing. And obviously, as there are a number of options to the trustees of how they could begin spending their money again, then hopefully there's something which will suit everybody. And I think with that communication with your local community foundation, then that's something which hopefully professional advisors can work with to support their clients, to look at how they could start getting money back out there, whether that is the community foundation managing it, or whether that is a transfer over, if that feels most appropriate. Yeah, so there's definitely different ways that we can offer support and advice.
Great, thanks, Laura. And in our situation with Kent Community Foundation, sometimes it is just the grant making element. So the trust and foundation, in itself, and the management of that still sits with whoever the wealth manager or private bank is. And all that Kent Community Foundation do is help them spend down the money that they should be spending for public benefit. So it's not always about a total trust transfer. In some situations that's preferred, and that's what their client wants, but often it will be just the grant making side of it. So that relationship with the wealth manager and the client themselves continues as it was before, and all we do is add value by then doing the grant making side of it, so that they are complying with the Charity Commission legislation and the objects of why they set their charitable trust up in the first place. You did touch upon this, but why is it important to identify dormant or inactive trusts? Why are we doing all this work?
I mean, I think it's both legally and morally, that there's a couple of sides to it, because obviously legally trusts do, as I mentioned, have this duty to fulfill the public benefit requirement, and so it's written into law that any charity that's established or trust has to make sure that whatever they're doing meets the public benefit requirement. So they have to be spending that money on local projects supporting the causes that the trust was originally set up to support. So it's very, very important on a legal level, and there can be repercussions if that doesn't happen. So obviously the Charity Commission is very understanding, and they do, I've worked on updating objects which are extremely outdated, and so it may just be that trustees are really struggling and they genuinely have no idea how to be able to spend this money again. And so the Charity Commission does understand that they might need extra support with that, but at the end of it, it's something which people do need to consider legally. Also, there are assets sitting there doing nothing, and morally, this money needs to be spent. It needs to be spent on supporting local causes. There's so much money wrapped up. I think, 1.4 billion pounds in the initial scope that is not being spent. And just thinking about that and the impact that can have within the community, it does make you think, that's not okay. And we need to be working to support that money to get back out into the community to be running excellent projects again.
Thanks, Laura. And of the conversations that I've been having recently with some wealth managers, the challenge that they have, of course, is that some people do set up trusts as a tax benefit. They're advised to, and that is the job of the wealth manager. They will advise their client that for tax reasons, they should put some of this money into a trust and foundation. But when they do that, it's the obligation that comes with it. So you can't get the tax benefit, but then not deliver on the moral obligation that you have actually to then give that money back out. So I think it's important really for professional advisors to understand the obligation of actually doing that in the first place when they are advising clients to set up a private family trust and foundation.
Absolutely. And also, if you just search public benefit requirement Charity Commission in your search engine, then you'll find some really helpful information in there about what the obligations are when establishing a trust. So that's something for people to look at if they're interested.
Oh, thank you. No, that's really helpful. So moving on to the relationship that you have and sort of how it works. So how do you work with community foundations when you identify, or Charity Commission has sent you a list of dormant or inactive? Dormant's probably the most appropriate description in this instance, but a dormant trust, so no activity at all, meaning it's likely that they have no active trustees either. So in that situation, how does that work in terms of your role and then passing on to the relevant local community foundation?
So, I can support community foundations as much or as little as they need, but the basic, if I just give a kind of basic overview, is I can contact trustees, but usually I think the foundations would prefer to do this themselves. I think mainly because they've got the local knowledge, so they may know some of the trustees within that trust, or they may know someone who knows. So they like to make contact and just have that discussion and that opening chat with the trustees, because they understand their local area, and they have that knowledge of that. Really, my main role within it is to liaise with the Charity Commission where necessary, also to liaise with trustees, and to support with the paperwork. So as Amy mentioned, the process is very, very simple. So once agreement is reached between the trustees, and hopefully the trustees respond to, our overtures, and they will, if they're interested in doing a transfer, then I can work with them to create the declaration which is needed. So it's an incredible document, actually, because if trustees want to do this process outside of the Revitalising Trust programme, they have to do resolutions, they have to submit those to the Charity Commission, and it can take an awfully long time. But through the Revitalising Trust programme, what's great is it's been really streamlined. So we've got a declaration document which varies depending on whether the trust has something like permanent endowment or if the objects need updating, for example. And so I will work with the trustees and with the foundations to establish what the objects need to look like. If they do need updating, to just establish whether permanent endowment needs removing, and make sure that I've got the right declaration, draw that up, and then do the kind of to and fro with the Charity Commission to make sure that they're happy with it all, and that the trustees are happy, and that the foundation's happy. And then once that's all done and dusted, I support the process right through so that I can do reminders about doing asset transfer over to the foundations, and also just general advice. So if a community foundation got in touch and said, oh, I've been speaking to this trust and they're not quite sure what their options are, then I can help with that as well.
Great, Laura, and I think that, even for community foundations, it's helpful to understand the context of how it works with Charity Commission, because as you say, if you go alone, I don't mean community foundations, but as an individual or a gentleman that I was speaking to this morning, actually, it can be quite a long drawn out process, whereas if it goes through a Revitalising Trust programme, the process is expedited, I suppose, and you can provide them with advice, which is free, which, that's also a key thing. So if you have a group of people who are trustees of a dormant or inactive trust, and they want to transfer to a community foundation or just dissolve the trust and give the assets away in whatever way that they want to do that, then you can help them do that, and it doesn't cost them any money, and actually you're more accessible than Charity Commission. So
yeah, I mean, what's great is I do have a direct contact with the Charity Commission. There's a dedicated team with Revitalising Trust, so it does mean that things are, that it's definitely faster to do it through the programme.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next question we've got is, is there advice you can give professional advisors who manage dormant trusts, or they know they have a trust that a client is set up that hasn't been given any money away ever?
Yeah.
What can they do about that? So how do they broach that subject with their client in that situation when they know that they, as you say, there's a moral obligation to spend the income from those investments down for charitable purposes?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, because obviously it could be quite sensitive. So I think probably the first thing to do would be to get in touch with the client and ask why they're dormant, and ask why funds haven't been spent, because there may be people who have, like you were saying, just set up as to get tax benefits from it. But there may be other people who genuinely want to be spending the money, but they really don't know how to go about it. And that's something which just needs to be found out. So why are they dormant? And is there any support that can be offered? So is it something that could be easily done through speaking to the Charity Commission to update objects? Is it something which your local community foundation could help with and offer advice? Or is it that the whole idea of running a trust is scary, or they feel like it's become a burden, and actually there does need to be that discussion about, well, maybe this money would be better looked after elsewhere. So I would say that finding that out is key. Actually, is why is the money not being spent? and then have a chat with Kent Community Foundation or your local community foundation, because they are experts in this field, and there may be several different options that they can offer. As you were saying earlier about, potentially, is it just about supporting with the grant making and looking after that side of things, which would then get us, that money flowing again. And they can still have involvement if they really want it, potentially, depending on asset value. And I think it's fair to say that the community foundations will always try to accommodate the needs of the trustees as and when they can, but they'll also be realistic about what they can offer and what can be achieved. So yeah, it's a lot of discussion, and it's just really trying to find out the key reasons for that dormancy.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. So in terms of professional advisors, what advice would we give on how they can identify dormant or inactive trusts? I mean, that may be a naive question, but if I was, an accountant solicitor, or I worked for a private bank, and I actually had quite a lot of clients who may be in this situation, how would I go about even at least identifying who those people were?
I mean, obviously, the professional advisors will know their clients really, really well. And I'm sure that probably whilst we're having this discussion, there's probably several people thinking, yes, I can actually think of a number, even just off the top of my head, who which they're not spending their money. And then whilst looking after the client accounts, I'm sure that you'll come across some where you think, well, nothing's been spent, but there is income here. What's happening? And it's just about, with that intimate knowledge that you have of your clients, I'm sure that now that you've got a bit more awareness about the fact that there is this issue with dormant trusts, that you'll be thinking, you'll probably notice those more and be able to identify them. I know that there's different ways that different banks deal with dormancy, and maybe that's something which professional advisors can think about as well. So we work very closely with CCLA investment bank, and they have a process that they run through if they identify that an account is dormant, and so they have several different steps that they do. So it's about contacting the client, and if they for some reason can't get through to them, I mean, maybe you have clients on your books that you've lost contact with. And that's something else as well, that you haven't been able to get hold of them, and that's a potential problem, because then you've got these assets there which are locked up, and so there may be ways to work with that and see if there are different opportunities to be able to unlock those assets. But certainly that there is a process which needs to take place to make sure that you've tried numerous ways of contacting clients to make them aware that they have dormant trusts and assets sitting there, and just reiterating the fact that there is this public benefit requirement for these trusts, so that those, hopefully, that can start being worked on and being looked at.
And actually, Laura, that brings me on to a supplementary question to that, because we have been aware in the past that in some situations we haven't been able to actually get in contact with the trustees, or only some of the trustees, and so has Charity Commission come up with a way of sort of addressing that problem? So you may, so you'll have maybe still 4 or 5 trustees registered on Charity Commission as the trustees stroke directors of the charity, and but we're only dealing with one, or one has moved to Australia, or we have genuinely had a situation like that where someone didn't live in the country anymore, but they were still registered as a trustee of the charity, and therefore it stalled.
Yes, it is. It's a problem. It is a problem. And I think people forget about the fact that they have to keep the Charity Commission updated. What we have within the programme, So I mentioned that there's a number of letters. So the first letter that's sent out will go to the main contact of the trust as noted on the Charity Commission. And after that, if they haven't had a response from that, they will then send the letter to all of the trustees. So actually the Charity Commission does have addresses and contact details for all of the trustees of a trust. So if there's several and you've not been able to get hold of one, they do have that information. That's something which obviously they don't share because of data protection.
Yeah.
But you know, there may well be means. So it's something which, if that did come up, you could contact me or contact the Community Foundation to say, is there any way of getting in contact with the trustees, the remaining trustees of this trust, because we cannot contact this person. So there are ways. They also, the Charity Commission does have powers which they can enact under the Charities Act as well. They're a bit more brutal, so they don't use them often, but they have something called a Section 107. So if you find that you cannot get in touch with any of the trustees at all, and it is established that there are no trustees in existence anymore for this, you know, whether they have just flown away and not updated their details and they can't be got hold of, then that section actually allows them legally to transfer their assets from bank accounts over to a chosen charity. So that is one power that they can enact. There's also a Section 80. And a Section 80 is if they've tried to get in contact and they know that the trustees are there, but they are not responding. And then at that point, a Section 80 means that all trustees can be removed and new trustees can be put in place of the Charity Commission's choosing. So they, you know, they're quite hard tools. And obviously where possible, we would not want to go down those routes, and the Charity Commission would rather avoid it if they can contact the trustees. But yeah, there are powers that can be enacted in those circumstances.
Thanks, Laura. Amy, there's two questions in the Q&A box. Could you just ask Laura those questions?
Yeah, sure. So the first question says, can you explain how the spirit of the original gift can be safeguarded on a transfer to a foundation? To what extent are the objects able to be changed by agreement with the Charity Commission? That's
a really good question. Yeah, absolutely. So we have to adhere to the charitable objects when there's a transfer. That, you know, that is so if the original objects were for, as an example, spinsters' cloaks, as one which I have worked on, so cloaks for spinsters over 40, then that would be what we'd have to spend it on. So what we can do is, within the declaration, there is a way of updating the objects. Now, what the Charity Commission is really flexible. So obviously that, when it was established, however many hundreds of years ago, essentially that's relief of poverty. So what that would mean is we can make sure that just goes to relief of poverty. So we can expand those charitable objects. If, for example, that same charity, so that would be an easy one to do, because you can see just from the basis of it that that's for relief of poverty. If we turned around and said, well, we want to be using those assets for advancement of the arts, we couldn't do that. That's just taking it too far. So, you know, we might be able to argue, could it be for advancement of education? But that would be tenuous. But definitely we can widen it to be, something like that could be widened for relief of poverty.
It's more about modernising it, isn't it?
It is.
So, because, you know, some of them, as you say, can be more than 100 years old, and they will have, you know, I think when we had one in Medway, which was for the fallen women of Medway or something, was the description of the objects originally, and obviously that is actually about deprivation.
Yeah.
You know, and helping, you know, families that are struggling and probably more poverty related anyway. So it is about finding language and words that just update what those objectives would actually have meant in today's modern language, and actually that's the conversation, isn't it? The Charity Commission is, well, what is that language? And as you say, it can never be too far from the original objects. That's never it's not the point anyway.
Yeah.
The point is to get it spent based on the wishes of the original family or the original trustees who set the foundation up in the first place. So I think one of the things about Charity Commission is the safeguarding of that.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
that's what's actually helpful in this situation if you are doing a trust transfer.
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
they, you know, they want, at the end of it, the Charity Commission wants this money to get back out. That is the whole purpose of this. So they are very understanding and they're very flexible, and they get the fact that, you know, these trusts that were set up some time ago, at the time, that was the problem for poor people. So now, you know, when you're looking at relief of poverty in the modern day, then it's reasonably easy to widen that. And also geography as well, because what tends to happen too is you know, these trusts were set up to serve a very, very small part of an area, and, you know, for certain beneficiaries in a small part of the area. So we can also widen that too. So let's say that it was for, I don't know, Bearsted back in, you know, 1400 or something, then obviously that's a reasonably affluent area now, and it probably doesn't have any beneficiaries who need relief of poverty within that tiny area. So we can also widen that too, so it could be used for, you know, Maidstone as a whole or Kent, and so that's something to think about as well.
Great, thanks. Amy, what's the next question?
Yeah, just in addition to the previous, it says, are you only involved in charitable trusts? What about private ones?
Yes, I am only involved in charitable trusts. That said, we do work with certain unregistered trusts as well. I mean, at the end of it, the Charity Commission has jurisdiction over all charitable assets that exist. So it's difficult because obviously there are going to be trusts out there which they don't know about. And that's when we come back to this moral obligation, you know, okay, so legally and morally, even if it's not established with the Charity Commission, doesn't have a Charity Commission number, it's still, you know, money does still need to be spent. So there are numerous unregistered trusts out there, but still that is something which, if it came to the Charity Commission's attention, they would say, yeah, this needs to be looked at, and these funds need to be spent on the public benefit. But again, we can do trust transfers with unregistered trusts. It's just, yeah, it generally, when I work on the unregistered ones, they're coming as a tranche within usually councils. So normally that's work with council trusts. So we'll have maybe several of those are registered charities, but then they've also identified several pots which are unregistered for whatever reason. And then I will transfer those over as well. But yeah, it is mainly charitable trusts, yes.
Thanks, Laura. I know there's one other question which relates to us, so Amy, I'll leave that till the end, and go back to one of the other questions that I have here, which is, can trusts be transferred if they are still active? So they are active, they are happening at the moment. They've not been dormant for 5 years.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is something which the Charity Commission obviously wouldn't identify as part of the programme, but we do find that a lot of community foundations are approached by trustees who are considering the next steps for their trust. So they're looking at succession planning, and they are thinking, I'm getting to a point now where I don't want to be looking after this trust anymore. I'm okay at the moment, but I can see it's going to become a burden. I'm struggling to deal with the paperwork. So actually, let's talk about the options. And yeah, we have quite a few. We have probably the majority of the trust transfers that we deal with are actually done through discussions with local community foundations. And to be fair, I think that's thanks to the incredible relationships that the community foundations have built up within their areas. And so they're known, they're trusted, and trustees will approach them to talk about this and say, look, what can you do? How can you support me? And often that results in a transfer. And then what's lovely is, obviously, depending on the asset value, the trustees can have all of the good parts, so they can, you know, potentially get involved in panel discussions and look at reviewing applications, that kind of thing. Obviously, it varies from foundation to foundation and on asset value too. But then they don't have to do any of the reporting. They don't have to deal with any of that. And so that's something that the foundation will deal with. And so hopefully it's a really lovely balance for the trustees who may still want involvement, but just feel like they can't put in as much as they have done in the past. But yeah, we can facilitate that, and we can use exactly the same process as we use with the programme. So that means that we can use the same declarations, and it also means that it's all expedited and can happen nice and quickly and easily.
Yeah, and actually we have a live example of that, Laura, where that's exactly the situation. So it is an active trust at the moment. but the Board of Trustees are struggling to recruit trustees to actually carry out the ongoing work of that particular grant-making trust. And so we are in discussion with them about an asset transfer. So they have been active, so they haven't been contacted by Charity Commission, but as you say, they can still use that process if they come through a community foundation to actually then, because they're dissolved in that situation, they're actually dissolving. I think also it's helpful for people to understand that in that situation, when you do a full trust transfer, you are dissolving the trust. Therefore, you're dissolving the responsibility of the existing trustees, and that responsibility and the administration, everything that goes with it, is transferred over to a community foundation. So that, you know, that is happening in the process. Once that transfer is done, the trust and foundation becomes, you know, it's dissolved, and therefore there is no other obligation for those trustees other than whether they wish or don't wish, as you've just said, Laura, to be involved in the ongoing process with that particular community foundation. So they have the beauty of doing everything they did before, but just without any of the responsibility or the administration. In reality, that is why often foundations who are active but are at that stage where they are struggling to recruit new trustees, or their trustees are very elderly and don't have the time anymore, really, or the desire sometimes to carry on the whole process, because it is hard work to give money away. Giving money away well isn't easy, which was one of our other webinars last time around, but for all of the reasons that you have just identified when you talk about why people may have inactive trusts.
Yeah.
Amy, is there any other questions? I think there's one other question. It's in the chat, I think, rather than the Q&A.
Yeah, it's just asking to hear about an example of a transfer, of a trust transfer to KCF, and was it possible to change the original objectives?
So, Amy, do you want to answer that? Because you have got an example, haven't you?
Apologies, my video is hidden now. So this was a Medway Council were actually the trustees of a dormant fund, which was called the Philip William Farrow Fund. And this was a long time ago, and they didn't have the in-house resources to fill the objectives effectively. So the original objectives were, this is kind of an example that you were talking about earlier, it was to provide relief for the elderly residents, but of 4 very specific areas of Medway. So they did approach us asking if we may be able to help and take over the fund. But we then went to the Charity Commission to widen that scope of the objectives, as you said, to make them in a more modern context. So we were successful in that. The objectives were changed to support the elderly residents of Medway, which was obviously helpful for us. So now we are able to choose the projects to support through our grants committee. We do report back once a year to Medway Council. And then crucially, obviously, that money is now benefiting the Medway communities rather than being dormant like it was for years before. So that's just one example of a trust transfer that we've been successful with.
And Laura, also in the past, when it is possible, as I say, to change the objects, and actually as long as the objects are connected, but they can still be loosely connected to the original objects. Yeah. So, and I think often that's where you were saying at the very beginning of the discussion, that's where people might not always know that it's possible to do that. So even if you are an active trust, but you are struggling to give money away, and it's more to do with the objects that were set up previously, or you have been entrusted with and you don't have the confidence to give money away, because sometimes often, we spoke to a professional advisor a few weeks ago, and what she was saying was that they did help to establish a foundation on behalf of a family who have entrusted that to a board of trustees, and that board of trustees are then tasked with giving that money away and complying with the objects of the charity, but they haven't actually given any money away yet. They are coming up to their 5 years actually of not giving any money away. But it's because I think they're not confident. I think they're worried that they're going to do something wrong, and it's a bit like, you know, taking that first step and knowing that it's okay that you can give money away. Yeah, it's actually all right. And I think sometimes for people who are new trustees in a situation like that, it can be daunting. It is why people give through community foundations, because that whole process, if you don't have a process set up, is worrying. You want to make sure that you're complying with the wishes of the person who set the foundation up in the first place, and you have obligations as trustees. But sometimes it's just taking that first step. And as you were saying, Laura, you can help with that. So if there are professional advisors out there who have clients in that situation, you know, am I offering something that you can't actually fulfill? What I don't want is to be putting this out to people and saying, contact Laura, you know, she can help. I mean,
I can always offer advice, and that, you know, and I can always point in directions as well. I mean, in those circumstances, I think probably if the objects need updating, then that's something which I can advise on, but I would probably say speak to the Charity Commission to get that updated. But I can help with the idea of wording and that kind of thing. But yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I think a lot of it regarding giving and just having the confidence to give, again, I would say probably speak to the community foundation, because I don't do the giving, and, you know, community foundations are the experts in that. And I would say every time speak to the foundations to sit, because also if the foundation might be to say, well, yeah, we can support in that too, and there are those options as well if that's something which can help the trustees. There's loads of guidance as well on being trustees, and I think it's quite a nerve-wracking thing, I think, when you start looking at the fact that you are legally obliged to do these things, and maybe people haven't necessarily registered that. And they've become a trustee, and suddenly they're looking at all of this information and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm terrified that I'm going to mess something up. And again, there's a lot of information available. There are even short courses for free on being trustees and just helping with that. But obviously it's slightly different being a trustee of a trust and a trustee of a charity. So yeah, it's kind of making sure that you find the right information for your clients.
Great. Laura, is there anything else? I mean, I have all my questions answered and the questions that were in the Q&A in the chat. Is there anything that you would finally like to say to professional advisors who are managing inactive or dormant trusts?
My main thing here is just to really find out about dormancy and get in there and speak to your client. It gives a really good reason to get in touch with people and just say, you know, were you aware that there is this requirement? What's the problem? And is there anything that we can do to help you? And then, yeah, just get in touch with either myself or Kent Community Foundation to be able to talk that through. Generally, nothing is insurmountable when it comes to trust transfers. There will be a way to help, and there will be something that can be done to get those assets flowing again.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. As you say, there's always a solution. Mm-hmm. That's what we're in the business of. I think is making it easy for people to give money away locally. That's always the message, isn't it? So. Mm-hmm. So thanks very much, everyone. That's the end of the webinar. Amy will circulate the presentation, and also, Laura, if you don't mind, your contact details, certainly your email address. And then if anyone has any additional questions that they want to ask, or just, you know, a bit of advice, then please do either contact us at Kent Community Foundation or Laura if it's specifically about the Revitalising Trust programme, and especially the way that Laura can help expedite that process of transferring a trust, because it does make a difference having Laura involved versus your clients trying to do it themselves. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of the afternoon.